More than 400 years ago, America was not a country. It was a vast land of forests, rivers, and native tribes. In 1607, the first permanent English settlement was established in Jamestown, Virginia. America was once just wild land, ruled by tribes, not presidents. No White House, no New York, no power. In just 400 years, this land transformed into the most powerful nation on earth. This is not just history. This is a story of blood, struggle, slavery, wars, dreams, and ambition. Stay till the end, because America's past will change how you see its present. Number 1. Before America, the land before the USA, before 1607, before America became a nation, before flags, borders, and presidents, this land already had a history thousands of years old. More than 10 million Native Americans lived across this land. They were not one people, they were hundreds of different tribes. Each tribe had its own language, laws, leaders, and beliefs. The Cherokee lived in forests, the Sioux ruled the Great Plains, the Apache survived the deserts. The Iroquois Confederacy created one of the world's earliest democratic systems. They respected the land. Nature was not something to own, it was something to protect. There were no prisons, no money-based economy, and no kings like Europe. Life was hard, but it was balanced. Then came the Europeans. In the late 1400s, explorers from Europe arrived. Spanish, French, and British ships crossed the Atlantic. They were searching for gold, land, and power. But what they brought was more dangerous than weapons. They brought diseases. Smallpox, measles, and flu killed millions of Native Americans who had no immunity. Entire villages disappeared without a single battle. This was the greatest population collapse in human history. As Europeans settled, conflict became unavoidable. Land was taken, treaties were broken, Native people were pushed away from their homes. Some resisted, some tried to negotiate, most were destroyed. This dark chapter became the foundation on which modern America was built. By the early 1600s, Native American power was weakened, the land was open, and Europe was ready to claim it. This is where the story of America truly begins. Number 2. The first settlers. Birth of colonial America, 1607 to 1620. By the early 1600s, Europe was changing fast. Kings wanted more land, merchants wanted profit, and common people wanted a better life. Across the Atlantic, a vast land waited. In 1607, the British established the first permanent English settlement in North America, Jamestown, Virginia. The settlers believed America would make them rich, but America welcomed them with hunger, disease, and death. Jamestown was a disaster. Most settlers were not farmers. They were gentlemen, gold seekers, and adventurers. They didn't know how to grow food, they didn't understand the land, and they didn't respect the local native tribes. Within the first year, more than half of them died. This period became known as the starving time. People ate rats, leather, and even shoe soles to survive. Jamestown survived only because of discipline and force. Captain John Smith enforced strict rules: no work, no food. The settlement also depended on help from Native Americans, especially the Powhatan Confederacy. Without native knowledge, Jamestown would have vanished, but Jamestown was not built for freedom. It was built for profit. The Virginia Company controlled everything. Land, labor, and lives were treated like business assets. This planted the roots of capitalism in America. The arrival of the Mayflower, 1620. In 1620, a small ship crossed the Atlantic, the Mayflower. Unlike Jamestown settlers, these people were not looking for gold. They were looking for religious freedom. They were called pilgrims. They wanted to escape religious persecution in England. The Mayflower landed at Plymouth, far from its intended destination. Winter arrived early. Cold, hunger, and sickness killed many passengers. Half of them died in the first winter. Before stepping onto land, the Pilgrims did something revolutionary. They signed the Mayflower Compact. This document said the people would govern themselves. Laws would be made with consent. Everyone would be equal under the law. This was not democracy as we know it today, but it was a powerful beginning. Unlike Jamestown, Plymouth was built on cooperation. Pilgrims worked together. Families farmed together. Decisions were made collectively. Again, Native Americans played a key role. A native man named Squanto taught them how to grow corn, fish, and survive. Without Squanto, Plymouth would have failed. Two settlements, two futures. Jamestown and Plymouth represented two different Americas. Jamestown stood for profit and power. Plymouth stood for faith and self-rule. Together, they formed the DNA of America. Ambition and belief, money and morals, both would shape the future United States. By 1620, the foundation of colonial America was laid. The land was no longer empty. Europe had arrived, and America would never be the same again. Number 3. Colonial expansion, slavery, the rise and the dark truth, 1620 to 1750. By the mid-1600s, colonial America was no longer an experiment. It was expanding fast. From New England in the north to the Carolinas in the south, new settlements were growing along the Atlantic coast. Forests were cleared, farms expanded, towns turned into cities. America was being built, but at a terrible cost. 13 colonies take shape. Over time, 13 British colonies were formed. Each colony was different. New England focused on education, religion, and trade. The middle colonies became centers of farming and commerce. The southern colonies depended on large plantations, but one thing connected them all: the need for labor. And that labor came through slavery. The birth of slavery in America. In 1619, a ship arrived in Virginia carrying African men and women. At first, they were treated as servants. Soon, they were treated as property. Laws were created that said black people were not human, they were owned. Children were born into slavery, families were separated, hope was crushed. Life of enslaved Africans. Enslaved people worked from sunrise to sunset. They picked cotton, tobacco, rice, and sugar. They were beaten for small mistakes. They were punished for learning to read. They were sold like animals, yet they survived. They created songs, culture, faith, and resistance. They held on to identity in a system designed to erase it. America's moral contradiction. The colonies talked about freedom. They prayed for liberty. They dreamed of opportunity, but millions lived in chains. This contradiction shaped America's future. Freedom for some, slavery for others. This moral conflict would one day tear the nation apart. Economic growth, inequality, colonial trade flourished. Ships carried crops to Europe and brought goods back. Cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia grew rich, but wealth stayed in the hands of a few. Workers struggled, slaves suffered. Power belonged to landowners. America was rising, but not equally. Seeds of rebellion. As colonies grew stronger, they became more confident. They developed local governments. They created assemblies. They learned to rule themselves. Slowly, a dangerous idea was born. What if we don't need Britain? That idea would soon explode into revolution. Number 4. American Revolution, Birth of a Nation, 1765 to 1783. By the mid-1700s, America had changed. The colonies were no longer weak settlements. They had farms, cities, trade, and confidence, but they were still controlled by Britain. Britain saw the colonies as a source of money. The colonies saw themselves as a growing nation. This difference would lead to revolution, taxes, anger, and resistance. After fighting costly wars in Europe, Britain needed money, so they turned to the American colonies. New taxes were imposed: Stamp Act, Sugar Act, Townshend Acts. The colonists were angry. They had no representatives in British Parliament. Their message was clear: no taxation without representation. Protests spread across the colonies. British soldiers were sent to control the people. Tension exploded in 1770. During the Boston Massacre, 5 civilians were killed. America was no longer calm. Boston Tea Party, the point of no return. In 1773, Britain passed the Tea Act. Colonists saw it as another trap, so they responded with rebellion. Disguised as Native Americans, colonists boarded British ships and dumped tea into Boston Harbor. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain was furious. Harsh punishments followed. War was now unavoidable. The first shots of war. In 1775, fighting began at Lexington and Concord. These were the first shots of the American Revolutionary War. Farmers, workers, and volunteers picked up weapons. They were not trained soldiers, but they were fighting for something powerful: freedom. Declaration of Independence, 1776. In 1776, America made a bold decision. They declared independence from Britain. The Declaration of Independence stated, "All men are created equal. People are born with natural rights. Governments exist to protect those rights." This document changed world history. America was no longer a colony. It was a nation on paper. George Washington, the war F, or survival. Britain had the strongest army in the world. America had farmers. Victory seemed impossible, but one man changed everything. George Washington. He didn't win by power. He won by patience. Through harsh winters, defeats, and suffering, the army survived. France joined America against Britain. This shifted the balance. In 1781, British forces surrendered at Yorktown. The war was over. A new nation is born. In 1783, Britain officially recognized the United States of America. The impossible had happened. A group of colonies had defeated an empire. America was free, but freedom came with challenges. The hardest part was still ahead. Number 5. Building a new nation, Constitution, Expansion Division, 1787 to 1860. Winning independence was only the beginning. Now America faced a harder question: how do we govern ourselves? The colonies were free, but they were not united. Each state wanted power. Each feared losing freedom. The young nation stood on the edge of failure. The U.S. Constitution, 1787. In 1787, leaders gathered in Philadelphia. Their goal was simple: create a system that could survive. They wrote the United States Constitution. This document changed the world. It created a strong federal government, 3 branches of power, checks and balances. No king, no dictator. Power belonged to the people, but many Americans were afraid. They worried the government would become too powerful. So 10 amendments were added. They were called the Bill of Rights. They guaranteed freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, right to a fair trial. America became a nation of laws. George Washington, the first president. George Washington became the first president. He refused to become a king. He set a powerful example: peaceful transfer of power, respect for the Constitution, leadership without tyranny. America trusted its system. Westward expansion, the American dream. As America grew, people moved west. They believed in manifest destiny, the idea that America was meant to expand. New lands meant opportunity, but it also meant conflict. Native Americans were pushed off their land. Treaties were broken. Violence followed. Expansion created wealth and suffering. Slavery divides the nation. As new states were added, a dangerous question arose: should slavery expand too? Northern states opposed slavery. Southern states depended on it. Compromises were made. Tensions increased. America was growing, but splitting from within. The road to civil war. By the mid-1800s, the nation was divided. 2 Americas existed. One believed in free labor. One believed in slavery. Politics failed. Anger grew. War was no longer avoidable. America was heading toward its greatest test. Number 6. The Civil War. Abraham Lincoln. A nation torn apart, 1861 to 1865. By 1860, America was no longer one nation. It was 2 worlds living under one flag. The North believed in industry, free labor, and unity. The South depended on agriculture and slavery. This conflict had been growing for decades. Now, it exploded. The breaking point: secession. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Southern states saw him as a threat to slavery. One by one, they seceded from the Union. They formed the Confederate States of America. America was breaking apart. The war begins. In 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun. Brother fought brother. Families were divided. States turned into battlefields. This was no longer politics. This was survival. The bloodiest war. The Civil War became the deadliest conflict in American history. Over 600,000 soldiers were killed. Battles like Gettysburg and Antietam left the land soaked in blood. Technology made war deadlier. Rifles replaced muskets. Railroads moved armies. Photography showed war's horror. America saw war for the first time. Abraham Lincoln, leadership in darkness. Abraham Lincoln was tested like no other leader. He believed the Union must survive. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared slaves in Confederate states free. This transformed the war. It was no longer just about unity. It was about freedom. The end of slavery. African Americans joined the Union Army. They fought for a freedom they had never known. In 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed. Slavery was abolished. A centuries-old injustice ended on paper. Victory and loss. In 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant. The war was over. The Union was saved, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Just days later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The man who saved the nation did not live to see it healed. A nation changed forever. America survived the Civil War, but it was forever changed. Slavery was gone, but racism remained. Unity was restored, but wounds stayed open. The war answered one question: the United States would remain one nation. The next challenge was rebuilding it.
Number 7. Reconstruction and Industrial Rise. Rebuilding America, 1865 to 1914. The Civil War was over. But peace did not mean healing. America faced a new challenge. How do you rebuild a broken nation? The South lay in ruin, cities destroyed, economies collapsed. Millions of formerly enslaved people were suddenly free, but had nothing. Reconstruction, hope, and failure. After the war, the government launched Reconstruction. Its goal was simple: rebuild the South, protect freed slaves, unite the nation. New laws were passed. African Americans gained citizenship and the right to vote. For a brief moment, America looked like it might change, but that moment did not last. Southern resistance grew. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan used terror and violence. Jim Crow laws were created. Segregation replaced slavery. Freedom existed, but equality did not. The rise of industry. While the South struggled, the North surged ahead. Factories multiplied. Steel, oil, and railroads exploded. Men like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller built massive empires. America became an industrial giant. Immigration, building the nation. Millions of immigrants arrived from Europe and Asia. They worked in factories, built railroads, and powered the economy. Life was harsh, low wages, long hours, dangerous conditions, but hope kept them going. This was the American dream, earned through sweat. Cities rise, inequality grows. Cities grew rapidly. New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh became industrial centers. Skyscrapers touched the sky, but wealth was unequal. The rich grew richer. Workers lived in poverty. Child labor was common. America was powerful, but deeply divided. Seeds of change workers began to organize. Labor unions demanded rights. Strikes spread across the nation. Slowly, reforms followed. Safer workplaces, shorter hours, labor laws. America was learning that growth needed fairness. A new America emerges by 1914. America was transformed. No longer a rural nation, no longer a former colony. It stood ready to step onto the world stage. A global era was about to begin. Number 8, World Wars and the Rise of a Superpower, 1914 to 1945. In less than 30 years, America went from isolation to global domination. 2 world wars, millions of deaths, and the birth of a superpower. World War I, America enters the world, 1914 to 1918. When World War I began, America stayed out. Europe was burning, but the U.S. chose neutrality. Americans believed foreign wars were not their fight. Everything changed in 1917. German submarines attacked ships. American lives were lost. The famous Zimmermann telegram revealed a secret German plan against the United States. America entered the war. Fresh American troops tipped the balance. In 1918, the war ended. America had tasted global power for the first time. Between wars, the Roaring Twenties and Great Depression, the 1920s brought celebration, jazz, cars, Hollywood. America felt unstoppable. Then in 1929, everything collapsed. The stock market crashed, banks failed, millions lost jobs. The Great Depression crushed hope. President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. Government stepped in. America survived, but scars remained. World War II, the defining moment, 1939 to 1945. When World War II began, America again tried to stay out. Then came December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor was attacked. America was at war. The nation mobilized. Factories turned into war machines. Women joined the workforce. The U.S. fought in Europe and the Pacific. In 1945, Germany surrendered. Japan fought on. Then came a moment that changed the world forever. The atomic age begins. 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war ended. Victory came, but at a terrible cost. America emerged as the strongest economy, the most powerful military, a global leader. The superpower era had begun. Number 9, Cold War, space race and civil rights. Modern America emerges, 1945 to 1991. From the ashes of World War II, America faced a new enemy, not on the battlefield, but in the mind, the skies, and in its own streets. The Cold War begins, 1945 to 1991. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpower. 2 nations, 2 ideologies, 2 visions of the world. Capitalism versus communism, democracy versus totalitarianism. Fear gripped the world. Nuclear weapons created the threat of total annihilation. The Cold War was not fought with tanks and planes, but with spies, propaganda, and influence. America built alliances like NATO. The Soviets formed the Warsaw Pact. Every move was calculated, every decision critical. The space race reaching for the stars. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite. The United States felt humiliated. America needed to lead in science, technology, and innovation. NASA was formed. Schools focused on math and science. In 1969, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. America had reached the stars. The civil rights movement, fighting within. While America competed globally, millions fought for freedom at home. Segregation, discrimination, and violence plagued African Americans. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks challenged injustice peacefully. I have a dream. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 brought real change. Vietnam, protest, and political change. The 1960s and 1970s were turbulent. Vietnam War divided the nation. Protests filled streets. Generational conflict grew. America learned that global power came with responsibility and consequences. The 1980s, Reagan and the end of the Cold War. By the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan confronted the Soviet Union. A mix of diplomacy and military pressure helped bring the Cold War to an end. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. America stood alone as the undisputed superpower, a modern America by 1991, economically strong, militarily dominant, globally influential. But America had learned lessons. Power is fragile. Freedom is fought for. Unity is never guaranteed. The stage was set for a new world and a new century. Number 10, Modern Era, America Today and Global Influence, 1991 to 2026. From the end of the Cold War to the digital age, America transformed faster than ever. War, crises, breakthroughs, and a role as the world's leader. America, after the Cold War, 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. America is the world's sole superpower. The economy grows, technology explodes, the internet changes everything. September 11th, a nation tested. September 11th, 2001, terrorists attack New York and Washington, D.C. Thousands die. America responds. War in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, heightened security. The world watches America's resilience, technology, innovation, and economy. Silicon Valley becomes the hub of innovation. Companies like Google, Apple, and Microsoft shape the modern world. Social media, smartphones, and AI change how people live, work, and connect. America leads in technology and economy as never before. Social change and challenges. America faces internal struggle. Racial equality movements continue. Gender equality advances. Political polarization grows. Climate and public health crises challenge leadership. Yet democracy endures. America continues to debate, protest, and reform. The hallmarks of a living democracy. Global leadership and influence. From international trade to global security alliances, America shapes the 21st century world. NATO and UN leadership, humanitarian aid, cultural influence through movies, music, and technology. America's ideas, products, and policies touch every corner of the planet. Facing the future today, America is complex, diverse and innovative, powerful but challenged, a symbol of freedom and opportunity. The story of 400 years is not just about battles or politics, it's about resilience, vision, and change. The journey continues, the nation adapts, the world watches. Outro. This wasn't just the story of America. This was the story of people who never quit. From native lands to a global powerhouse, the United States was built through struggle, sacrifice, and straight-up resilience. But here's the real thing to remember. History doesn't happen overnight. Every move, every choice, every moment, that's what shaped the America we know today. And the real question isn't just how America got here. Short pause. Music builds. The real question is, where is the United States headed next? If this journey hit different for you, if you like history told raw, real, and no fluff, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let me know in the comments. What part of American history blew your mind the most? Because trust me, the next chapter, it's gonna be even crazy. This is your channel name, and this is history, not from a textbook, but the way it actually went down.